we are looking at putting together some reports based on the data that we collect across the industry. But we wanted to kind of present some initial findings here. So one of the interesting things that we thought was that the length of the supply chain did seem to impact the data that we saw. So going from, if you go from 2 to 3 hops, for example, it seems to have increased it by 17%, and then as you go through 4 hops, it seems to have increased it by 75%. Now, I want to be clear that that doesn't mean that the length is the only vector in terms of fraud, and there are a lot of good reasons to have a long supply chain. Like to Ian's point earlier about the tools that help smaller publishers monetize their traffic is a great one where you really need that extra hop. It is something that I wanted to kind of mention about at least the importance of really looking at your supply chain. Another thing that we thought was interesting was the data completeness, right? So the point that the couple of slides ago when I talked about the incomplete paths, seemed like there was a increase in 71% when it goes through incomplete paths. That kind of seems logical, but I'm curious how that'll play out over time when we start, everyone starts enforcing the supply paths too. The third side, which is probably less interesting in some ways, but directly from a point of IVT, but still interesting, is the length of the hops for different platforms, right? So the desktop web was clearly a longer. The number of hops is definitely more. CTV is less. I thought that was interesting because it kind of reflects where we are from a maturity point of view, right? So CTV is still a newer form of media in so many ways, and might be more direct sold in many cases. But I think this trend is something that we should be looking at over time. I think that even CTV is going to start having more hops as well.
Yeah, and I have a few thoughts about all this. So as Amit alluded to be clear, it is absolutely not the case that there is a causal relationship that more hops causes more fraud, because fraud is caused by somebody. Just having more hops doesn't make there be more fraud. But my hypothesis about this, well, a few things. First, the more indirection in the supply chain, the more opportunity there is for bad actors to slide their way in. For a fairly detailed explanation of this, see the AdExchanger article I wrote called the risks of secondhand inventory that sort of illustrates this. But the major exchanges have a pretty good sense of inventory quality and are not going to allow particularly untrustworthy companies to use their exchange. Right. However, they may be able to find smaller players who hold an account on that exchange, who are less discriminating or less aware, and be able to sell through them. And add a few more hops to this, and you get this indirection where nobody actually thinks they're complicit in piping fraud into the ecosystem, and yet it still happens. Also, I think that, so this is declared information, right? So when it's incomplete, somebody hasn't declared the necessary information. I would not be surprised if the companies with a greater commitment to traffic quality are more likely to have shorter chains because they're paying attention, and chains declared complete because they're paying attention, right? And paying attention tends to lead to less fraud because you see things that are bad and you stop them. Also, this number of hops, CTV versus desktop, I think that helps get to the point, which is that fraud can be caused by bad actions from the publisher side. It can be caused by intermediaries. We know, and Pixel8 has talked about this before, there's a significant amount of fraud happening in the CTV space. A lot of it is happening at the publisher. Fake publishers, or, well, they're real business entities, but the channels that they publish may not actually have the viewership that they claim to. And so I think that just goes to illustrate that there are two components to look at. There's the fraudulent actions coming from the publisher, and there's the fraudulent actions coming from the intermediaries. And CTV might have a shorter supply chain at present, but there are still fraudulent actions coming from the publishers that need to be addressed. But the good news is those are already being addressed.